She woke up to the sound of birds outside the small window of her room, but the chirping did little to chase away the emptiness she felt in her stomach. Another morning had arrived, and with it the same gnawing hunger that had become a constant companion in her young life. She pulled her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to find warmth in the cold air that crept through the cracked walls. Her room was small, barely enough space for her little bed and a tiny wooden chair she had inherited from someone long gone. The floorboards creaked under her feet as she moved, and the faint smell of dust and old wood filled the air. Yet even in this modest setting, she held on to a spark of hope that something good might happen today. Breakfast, as usual, was a distant thought. Her family's cupboard was nearly empty, save for a few crumbs of bread that had long lost their freshness. She knew her mother would try to stretch what little they had, but sometimes it wasn't enough to fill even one stomach. She quietly tiptoed to the kitchen, not wanting to wake anyone yet. Her younger sibling was still asleep, curled up under a tattered blanket, breathing softly. She peeked into the cupboard and found nothing. The little girl sighed, the sound almost lost in the quiet morning. She decided to leave the crumbs for her sibling, telling herself that she could wait a little longer. Hunger had a way of being both cruel and patient, and she had learned to be the same. School was a short walk from their tiny home, but the path felt longer when her stomach was empty. She put on her worn shoes and stepped out into the soft morning light. The air was crisp and the sky was tinged with shades of pink and gold. She loved this part of the day, when the world seemed calm and everything was full of possibilities. But as her feet carried her forward, the hunger in her stomach reminded her that life was not always calm or full of possibilities. When she reached school, the hallways were already buzzing with children laughing, running, and sharing stories. Some had shiny new bags and fresh lunch boxes, while others had shoes with bright colors and well-ironed uniforms. She quietly slipped into her seat at the back, wishing she could be as carefree as them. Teachers began their morning announcements, but she could hardly focus. The emptiness in her stomach kept pulling her thoughts away from lessons and into dreams of warm meals and soft bread. During recess, the other children played games and exchanged snacks. She watched from a distance, her hands clenching into tiny fists as the sight of sandwiches and fruits made her stomach ache even more. She had learned not to complain, not to draw attention to her hunger. Life had taught her that being quiet often meant surviving. Sometimes she would imagine herself in a world where she could eat freely, where no one had to worry about crumbs or empty plates. These daydreams kept her going, even when reality felt harsh. Despite her hunger, she had something inside her that hunger could not touch: her love for music. She had discovered it one day when wandering near the community center, where an old piano sat, waiting for someone to play. She had never touched a piano before, but something about it called to her. She would watch from the doorway, mesmerized by the way others' fingers danced across the keys, producing sounds that felt like magic. The music seemed to fill the empty spaces in her heart, bringing warmth and light where hunger and struggle resided. Her friends at school didn't understand this part of her. They laughed at small mistakes, called her names, and sometimes pretended to ignore her as if she were invisible. But she didn't let it break her. In her mind, she was already somewhere else, where the piano waited for her hands to bring it to life. The thought of playing, even just for a moment, made the day's struggles feel lighter. Music was her secret place, a place where she could be free. One afternoon after school, she wandered toward the community center. The streets were busy, filled with people going about their daily routines, but she moved quietly, focused on her goal. The center looked ordinary from the outside, but she knew what lay inside. She peered through the window and saw the piano, slightly dusty but beautiful. She could almost feel the keys under her fingers. Imagine the notes rising and filling the room. Her heart beat faster at the thought, even though she knew she might be laughed at if she dared to play. But her longing was stronger than her fear. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under her weight. The piano stood at the corner, bathed in soft light from the windows. She walked toward it, her small hands hovering over the keys before resting gently. The wood was cold under her fingertips, but the sound it produced when she pressed a key was like a small miracle. She closed her eyes and played a single note, letting it ring through the empty room. The sound was simple, but it was hers. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with food. She felt alive. Each day after school, she found herself returning to the piano, She didn't know the names of the notes or the proper techniques, but she learned through touch and feeling. Her fingers grew confident, dancing across the keys, producing melodies that told stories her lips could not. The music became her language, a way to express the hunger, the longing, the dreams she carried in her heart. Even when the world outside seemed harsh, the piano was a place where she could breathe, where she could exist fully without judgment. Back at home, she would sneak small moments to practice in her imagination, tapping invisible keys on her lap or tracing patterns in the air. She imagined audiences clapping, smiling at her, recognizing the beauty she felt inside. This private joy gave her strength, a reminder that no matter how empty her stomach might feel, her spirit could remain full. She began to notice that hunger, though painful, sharpened her focus. It made her appreciate every note she played, every sound she coaxed from the piano. It became fuel for her determination. The days blended together, a mix of struggle and small triumphs. She became known at school as quiet, a little girl with worn clothes and a reserved smile. But behind her eyes there was a fire that no teasing or neglect could extinguish. She dreamed of the day she could show everyone what she could do, not to prove them wrong, but to share the music that had grown inside her heart. Each day's hunger was a reminder of what she wanted, a motivator to reach beyond the limitations life had placed on her. She didn't speak much about her dreams. Words seemed too heavy, too vulnerable. Music was safer. It didn't judge, didn't demand explanations, and didn't care about the color of her shoes or the holes in her dress. The community center piano became her friend, a constant presence in a life that was otherwise uncertain. And even on days when she had nothing to eat, when the world felt empty and cold, she could play. The sound of the keys was enough to make her forget, even if just for a moment, the hunger that always lingered. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, she sat by her small window looking out at the world. She thought about the music she would play tomorrow, the notes she would learn, the melodies she would create. The hunger in her stomach was still there, a persistent companion, but it felt lighter. She had a secret power, something that no empty cupboard could take away. She had music, and it was hers alone. And as she drifted off to sleep, the faint smile on her lips was a promise to herself. One day she would play for everyone, and the world would listen. The next morning felt different. The sky was the same pale blue, and the wind whispered through the narrow streets, but inside her, a quiet excitement stirred. She remembered the piano from the day before, the way the keys felt under her fingers, the soft hum of the notes filling the room. It had been a small thing, a single note, but it had awakened something inside her. Today she told herself she would try again. Maybe she could play a little more, even if she didn't know the proper way. She pulled on her worn shoes, the soles thin and nearly worn through, and stepped out into the morning light. Her stomach growled faintly, reminding her that breakfast was a luxury she could not always count on, but she brushed the thought aside. The music waiting for her was more urgent, more alive than hunger. The walk to school felt longer than usual. Each step seemed to echo in her mind as she imagined the piano waiting at the community center. She thought of the melodies she wanted to create, notes that she had imagined while sitting on her bed the night before. Some children ran past her laughing and shouting, their voices carrying a carefree energy that made her wish she could join in without thinking about what she lacked. She felt a familiar pang of loneliness, but it was tempered by anticipation. Today might be the day she could play something more than a single note, and that thought lifted her spirits. School passed in a blur. Lessons came and went, teachers spoke, and other children shared jokes and snacks. She kept her eyes down most of the time, careful not to draw attention to herself. A few curious glances followed her, some questioning, others skeptical, but she didn't mind. Her mind was already elsewhere, imagining her hands gliding across the keys, coaxing out sounds that had never been heard before. She imagined the music wrapping around her like a warm blanket, filling the empty spaces that hunger and poverty could not reach. Recess arrived, and with it, the usual games and laughter. She stood at the edge of the playground, watching the other children pass sandwiches and snacks, their faces bright with enjoyment. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to focus on something else. She thought about the piano, about the moment when a single note had echoed through the quiet room. That memory had given her hope, and hope had become her shield against the teasing and hunger. Today she decided she would go straight to the piano after school, and she would not let fear hold her back. The bell rang, releasing the children into the streets, and she moved with purpose toward the community center. Her steps were light, careful not to trip on the uneven stones of the narrow street. She reached the door and paused, her hand hovering over the handle. Inside, the piano waited silently, almost as if it knew she was coming. She pushed the door open and stepped in, her small frame filling the room that smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The piano sat in its corner, slightly worn but majestic in its presence. She moved toward it, her hands trembling slightly, and placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes and pressed down, letting the sound rise gently, testing her touch. This time she tried more than a single note. She pressed another key, then another, listening to the way the sounds connected. It was awkward at first and the notes didn't flow perfectly, but there was something alive in the music, something that made her heart beat faster. She played slowly, carefully letting each note linger before moving to the next. It felt like speaking a language she had always known but never had the chance to use. The music filled the room, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. For a few precious moments, she forgot the empty cupboard at home, the cold floors, and the whispering hunger inside her. As she continued, a few children from her neighborhood entered the community center. They had followed her quietly, curious about what she was doing. At first they snickered, whispering among themselves. One of them leaned against the wall and muttered something about her clothes being old and torn. She froze for a moment, the notes faltering under her fingers. Fear and doubt crept in, the old familiar feeling of being judged and laughed at. But then she remembered the joy she had felt the day before, the magic of the piano under her touch. She took a deep breath, held her chin high, and let her fingers continue their dance across the keys. The teasing began softly at first, then grew louder. "She doesn't even know how to play," one child laughed. Another added, "What's she doing here? She can't even afford food." The words stung and she felt her heart shrink for a moment. But the music inside her was stronger than their voices. She let the notes rise, louder this time, filling the room with sounds that were beautiful and alive. Each note seemed to push back against the mocking laughter, each melody a tiny victory. Slowly, the children stopped laughing, their attention drawn irresistibly to the sounds that came from her hands. She played a simple tune she had created herself, a melody that rose and fell like waves. It was not perfect, but it was hers. The notes told a story of longing, of struggle, of a heart that refused to give up despite hunger and hardship. She poured every feeling she had into the music, letting her emotions guide her fingers. As the last note lingered in the air, a hush fell over the room. The children who had been teasing her looked at her with wide eyes, uncertain and quiet. The sound she had created was unlike anything they had expected, and it left them speechless. For the first time, she felt a flicker of pride. Not because they had stopped teasing her, but because she had expressed something true and real. She realized that the piano was more than an instrument. It was a way to show the world who she was without having to explain anything. She could speak through music, and the world had no choice but to listen. Her heart swelled with a mix of relief and excitement. She had faced fear and judgment and had not been defeated. From that day forward, the piano became her sanctuary. She visited it every afternoon, playing melodies that grew more confident and complex with each passing day. Sometimes she would watch other children play, learning from their fingers and the way they moved. Other times she played alone, inventing songs that carried her dreams and hopes. The community center staff noticed her dedication and quiet determination. One gentle voice, the voice of an older woman who managed the center, said to her once, "You have a gift, my dear. Keep playing no matter what." Those words stayed with her, a seed of encouragement that took root and grew stronger each day. School continued as before, with its mix of teasing and laughter. But the girl began to feel different. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, knowing that she had something special that no one could take away. The hunger still gnawed at her stomach and life still presented challenges, but she had found a place where she could shine. Music became her shield and her voice, a way to navigate a world that often seemed harsh and unfair. As days turned into weeks, the melodies she played became more intricate. She began to imagine herself performing for an audience, her music filling a hall, reaching people who would listen and understand. She dreamt of a day when hunger and hardship would not define her, when her talent would speak louder than any cruel words or empty cupboards. Each note she played was a step toward that dream, a testament to her resilience and determination. Evenings were quiet, and she would sit by the small window in her room, replaying the music in her mind. She imagined her fingers moving across the keys, the sounds echoing in the hearts of those who listened. Her imagination became a playground where she could create freely, where hunger and poverty had no power, and as she drifted off to sleep, a sense of purpose filled her heart. She knew that she had discovered something extraordinary, a part of herself that could never be taken away. Music had become more than a dream. It was a lifeline, a path forward, and a promise of something better. The piano had changed her, not by making life easier, but by giving her a voice, a way to rise above the challenges that surrounded her. And in that quiet, hopeful space, she found the courage to face each day with determination, ready to continue her journey, one note at a time. The days grew longer as the girl continued her routine of school, small meals, and afternoons at the community center. Her hunger was always present, a quiet but persistent reminder of the life she lived. Still, the piano called to her like a friend who never judged, who welcomed her no matter how empty her stomach or weary her body felt. Each afternoon she approached it with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She didn't know the proper techniques, the names of the notes, or how to read music, but she had a feeling that guided her fingers, a sense of rhythm and melody that she could not explain. Each day, she learned a little more, discovering the magic that happened when her emotions moved through her fingertips and into the keys. One particular day, the community center was unusually busy. Children were running from room to room, parents dropping off younger siblings, and volunteers organizing activities. The noise made her hesitate for a moment, unsure if she should play. The piano sat in the corner waiting patiently, as if it knew she was needed. She took a deep breath and moved toward it, her small shoes making soft sounds against the wooden floor. When she reached the piano, she placed her hands on the keys and pressed down. The sound was gentle at first, cautious as though she were testing the room. But slowly the music began to flow, tentative at first, then stronger, more confident. Her fingers moved as though they remembered what her heart already knew, weaving a melody that was tender and alive. As she played, some children stopped their games and began to watch. Some were curious, others skeptical, and a few whispered to each other. One boy leaned closer, tilting his head, trying to understand what she was doing. A girl near the doorway whispered, "She can't really play, can she?" The others laughed softly, assuming they would see a mistake or hear a jarring note. But as the music filled the room, the whispers died down, replaced by quiet fascination. Her hands moved with growing confidence, and the melody she had created began to flow naturally. She closed her eyes, allowing the music to guide her, and for a few minutes the room was silent except for the sound she made. The teasing that had often followed her seemed distant today, as if her music created a protective bubble around her. She remembered the harsh words from other children at school, and the snickers from those who had followed her to the community center before. She thought about how her stomach often ached and how she sometimes went to bed hungry. Those feelings were still there, but they seemed smaller now, diminished by the power of the sound she was creating. She was speaking through her fingers, expressing what words could not, and that expression demanded attention. It was as though the piano had become her voice, louder than any teasing or laughter. Her music took on new shapes that day. She explored the highs and lows of the keys, moving from soft, delicate notes to bold, sweeping chords. Each movement carried emotion, telling a story of longing, hope, and determination. She imagined herself playing for an audience who would understand the struggles behind each note, who would hear not only the melody but the heart behind it. The thought filled her with courage. She could feel the strength in her hands and in her chest, a determination that no hunger or hardship could erase. For the first time, someone approached her quietly while she played. It was a volunteer at the community center, a gentle woman with kind eyes and a calm voice. She watched the girl's fingers move, her expression softening with every note. When the music ended, the volunteer spoke gently, "You have a special gift. Keep practicing and don't let anyone discourage you." The girl's heart lifted at the words. She had longed for encouragement, for someone to notice the effort and passion she poured into the piano. These words were more valuable than food in that moment, more nourishing than any meal could be. Days turned into weeks, and her dedication did not waver. She played after school, exploring more complex melodies, inventing her own tunes and experimenting with the sounds she could create. Some children continued to tease her when they passed by, but she learned to ignore them. Their words could not touch the music inside her. Every note she played became a declaration of resilience, a statement that she would continue to pursue her passion no matter the obstacles. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was her sanctuary, a place where her spirit could soar above the limitations of her circumstances. One afternoon, a small group of children gathered near the piano while she played. At first they were skeptical, whispering among themselves and sharing quiet laughs, but as the music continued, they became silent, their eyes widening with surprise. She could feel their attention, a mixture of disbelief and awe, as if they were seeing something they had never expected. The notes carried her emotions across the room, painting a story that spoke of perseverance and dreams. She played longer than usual that day, exploring variations in rhythm and tone, letting her creativity flow without fear or hesitation. The experience was transformative. She realized that her music had the power to change how people saw her. The same children who had once dismissed her as poor or weak began to look at her differently. They were still children, still prone to teasing at times, but the music demanded respect. It was an invisible shield, a way to claim her space in a world that often tried to ignore her. She began to notice small changes in the way others reacted, small glimmers of recognition that encouraged her to continue. At home, she shared her excitement quietly with her family. She could not explain the full impact of the piano, but she described the melodies she had created, the way the music felt in her hands. Her family listened with smiles, proud of the determination and courage she showed. Even though the cupboards remained sparse and the challenges of daily life persisted, there was a new light in their home, a sense of hope that music had brought. The girl felt a growing confidence, a belief that her dedication could lead to something greater, something beyond hunger and struggle. Evenings were spent reflecting on her progress. She imagined herself performing for larger audiences, the notes reaching people far beyond the community center. She thought about how music could be a bridge connecting hearts and minds, and she felt a sense of purpose that filled her with warmth. Each day, she set small goals for herself, mastering a new tune, exploring new combinations of keys, and letting her imagination guide her fingers. The piano became a trusted companion, one that understood her in ways no one else could. She began to notice how her emotions influenced her playing. On days when she felt sad or frustrated, the music became softer, more melancholic, reflecting the struggles she carried. On days when she felt hopeful, the melodies soared, full of brightness and energy. She discovered that the piano was not only a tool for expression, but also a mirror for her inner world. By playing, she could understand herself more deeply, acknowledge her fears, and celebrate her small victories. The act of playing became both a refuge and a teacher, guiding her through the challenges of life with subtle wisdom. Her growth did not go unnoticed by the volunteers at the community center. They began to watch her more closely, offering gentle advice and encouragement. One day, the same woman who had praised her earlier suggested a small challenge. Try playing a longer piece today, one that tells a full story from beginning to end. The girl felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had never attempted such a thing, but the challenge inspired her. She sat at the piano and began to experiment, piecing together notes and sequences that captured the emotions she wanted to convey. The result was a melody that felt alive, a story that unfolded in sound and filled the room with a quiet magic. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment, as if everyone had been holding their breath. Then, softly, the volunteers clapped, their expressions warm with admiration. The children who had gathered earlier looked at her with new eyes, some shyly applauding, others whispering in awe. She felt a surge of pride, not from the applause itself, but from knowing she had pushed herself, taken a risk, and created something beautiful. It was a reminder that her talent and determination could overcome fear and doubt, and that she could carve out a space for herself in a world that often overlooked her. That night, she lay in bed thinking about the progress she had made. The hunger in her stomach was still there, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable obstacle. Music had given her strength, a way to rise above the difficulties she faced. She thought about the challenges ahead, the long road of learning and growing, and felt a quiet determination settle in her heart. She knew that every day she spent at the piano, every note she played, was a step toward something greater, a future where her talent could shine and where she could share the joy of music with others. The girl drifted off to sleep with a sense of hope and anticipation. She dreamed of melodies, of hands moving across keys, and of a world that would listen. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a part of her identity, a reflection of her resilience and courage. And as she slept, the music she had created that day echoed softly in her mind, a promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had found a way to rise above them, one note at a time. One afternoon, the girl walked toward the community center with a mixture of excitement and nerves she hadn't felt before. Today, something felt different, almost as if the air around her vibrated with possibility. She had spent the morning thinking about melodies and rhythms, the sounds she wanted to create, and now the piano waited for her, patient and silent in the corner of the room. The community center was quiet, save for the soft sounds of other children in distant rooms, their laughter muffled but familiar. She felt her heart beat faster as she approached the instrument, her fingers brushing the keys lightly before resting fully upon them. She began to play slowly, testing her touch, finding the balance between soft notes and stronger chords. Today, she wanted to try something she had never dared before, a piece she had been imagining in her mind for weeks. It was more complex than anything she had played before, a melody that rose and fell, weaving emotions into every note. Her hands moved with a confidence that surprised even her. Each sound she produced was filled with intention, and she felt the music become an extension of herself, carrying her thoughts, her dreams, and even the hunger she had grown accustomed to feeling. As she played, a group of children wandered in, drawn by the sounds. At first they whispered to each other, unsure if the music was real or some trick. Some giggled softly, expecting a mistake, but the girl continued, ignoring the uncertainty around her. Her eyes were closed and she let her hands guide the melody, letting every feeling find a voice in the notes. Slowly, the children stopped whispering, captivated by the music they heard. The sounds were unfamiliar and beautiful, full of life and emotion that could not be ignored. A few of the children in the room had teased her in the past, calling her poor or clumsy. Today they stayed quiet, drawn to the music despite themselves. One boy, who had once mocked her, now leaned against the wall with his mouth slightly open, unable to look away. Another girl sat cross-legged on the floor, her expression a mixture of awe and curiosity. The music told a story that words could not, and slowly, the barriers that had separated them began to crumble. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a bridge, connecting hearts and minds without the need for explanations. The melody she played rose and fell, gentle in some places, bold in others, carrying the weight of everything she had felt in the past months. She thought of the mornings when her stomach had been empty, the teasing from classmates, and the long walks to school with shoes that were too thin. She thought of the nights spent imagining melodies, practicing on invisible keys, and dreaming of a world where her music could be heard. All of those feelings poured into the notes, giving them depth and life. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if even the walls were listening. When the last note faded, there was a moment of silence, profound and complete. The children who had gathered stared at her, their expressions softening. Some whispered to each other, trying to find words to describe what they had just heard, but no words seemed sufficient. Even the volunteers, who had often seen children come and go, looked at her with admiration. The girl's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. For the first time, she realized that the music she created had the power to move people, to touch something deep inside them, and to make them see her not as a poor or timid child, but as someone extraordinary. A volunteer approached her quietly, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "That was beautiful," the woman said softly. "You have a gift that needs to be shared. Keep playing and never let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl's eyes glistened with tears. She had longed for recognition, for someone to see the effort, the emotion, and the talent she had poured into her music. These words were like sunlight breaking through clouds, warming her from the inside out. She nodded, a quiet promise forming in her heart that she would continue no matter the obstacles. After school, she continued her practice with renewed determination. She experimented with dynamics, learning to make notes soft and gentle, then strong and bold. She explored patterns, combining sequences of keys in ways that felt natural but fresh, letting her intuition guide her hands. Each day brought new discoveries, and with every melody, her confidence grew. She found joy not only in the music itself but in the process of learning, the small victories that came from creating something new. and the way the piano responded to her touch. It had become a partner in her journey, understanding her emotions and allowing her to express them fully. The teasing from other children did not disappear completely, but it became less powerful. They could mock her words, her clothes, or her lack of food, but they could not mock the music she produced. It was untouchable, a part of her that belonged only to her and the piano. Some children, drawn by curiosity, began to listen quietly rather than laugh. A few even asked questions, wanting to know how she learned, how she could play with such feeling. She answered politely but briefly, aware that the music was more important than explanations. Her playing spoke louder than any words ever could. At home, she would share her excitement quietly, telling her family about the pieces she had explored, the melodies she had created, and the small moments of recognition she had received. Her family smiled, proud not only of her skill but of her perseverance and courage. They could not always provide food or comfort, but they offered love and encouragement, and that became part of the music she played. The piano had become a channel for everything she held inside, a way to transform struggle and hardship into something beautiful and meaningful. The girl began to set new goals for herself. She wanted to play longer pieces, to experiment with emotions she had never explored, and to tell stories with her music. She imagined herself performing in front of an audience, seeing their reactions, feeling the connection that music could create. The thought filled her with determination. Every afternoon at the community center was an opportunity to grow, to discover new sounds and to push her abilities further. She practiced tirelessly, learning from each mistake and celebrating each success, small or large. One day she noticed a small group of children gathered in the doorway, their expressions hesitant but curious. They had never paid much attention to her before, but the music drew them in. She felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. Would they laugh? Would they leave? She took a deep breath and began to play. This time the music was richer, more expressive, carrying the story of her life, her dreams, and her struggles. The children watched in silence, captivated by the emotion and skill in her fingers. Some were moved, their eyes widening, and a few even whispered apologies for past teasing. The girl smiled quietly to herself, understanding that the music had changed something, even if only a little, in the hearts of those who listened. Each evening she reflected on the progress she had made. The hunger she had felt so acutely in the past months was still there, but it seemed less overwhelming. The music had given her strength, a way to rise above the difficulties that surrounded her. She had learned that determination, practice, and passion could create change, not just in herself but in others. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a symbol of hope, a tool for resilience, and a source of joy. Her dreams grew bolder. She imagined herself performing on larger stages, her melodies reaching people who had never heard them before. She thought about how music could connect hearts, inspire courage, and create understanding. She wanted to share that gift, to show that talent and determination could overcome obstacles, no matter how daunting. The piano had given her a voice, and she was determined to use it fully, to explore every note, every rhythm, and every emotion she could summon. The girl also began to notice how much she had changed. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. She walked to school in the community center with a sense of purpose, aware of the power she held within herself. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and felt a deeper connection to the world around her. Music had opened a door not only to expression but to self-discovery, showing her that she could face life's challenges with courage and creativity. Through all of this, the girl remained humble and focused. She knew that the journey was long and that there would be setbacks, but she also knew that each day brought opportunities for growth. She practiced diligently, listened carefully to advice, and allowed her emotions to guide her playing. She learned that patience and persistence were as important as talent, and that every note, every melody was a step forward. The piano had become a companion, a teacher, and a friend, guiding her through the uncertainties of life with gentle wisdom. Even in moments of doubt, when the teasing or hunger threatened to overwhelm her, she found solace in the music. It reminded her of her strength, her dreams, and the beauty she could create. She realized that the world could not take away her talent, her determination, or her love for music. Each note she played was a testament to her courage, a story of resilience that spoke louder than words. And as she continued to explore, to experiment, and to grow, She felt a quiet certainty that she was moving toward something extraordinary, a future where her music could touch the lives of others and show that even in hardship, beauty could thrive. The day started like many others, with the girl waking to the pale light filtering through the cracks in her small room. Her stomach was empty, as it often was, but a quiet excitement filled her heart. Today felt important, though she could not yet name why. She got dressed in her worn clothes, pulling her shoes on carefully, and stepped outside. The streets were familiar, lined with small homes, narrow alleys, and people going about their daily routines. She walked with a purpose, her mind focused on the piano waiting at the community center. Each step carried a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something significant was about to happen. When she arrived at the center, the usual noise of children playing echoed through the rooms. She moved quietly to the piano, feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination. Today she wanted to attempt something she had never tried before, a complete piece that would tell a story from beginning to end. She positioned her small hands on the keys, feeling the smoothness of the wood, the coolness of the metal beneath. She closed her eyes and let her imagination guide her. Each note was deliberate, each chord carefully chosen to express the emotions she carried inside her. As she played, she noticed a small group of children gathering in the doorway. They whispered among themselves, their curiosity evident. Some had teased her in the past, but now they were drawn in by the sound. The music filled the room, rising and falling, carrying the story she wanted to tell. It spoke of struggle, of hunger, of dreams that felt just out of reach, and of hope that refused to die. Her fingers moved with confidence and emotion, creating a melody that seemed larger than the room itself. Even the volunteers paused to listen, impressed by the depth and feeling in her playing. The children who had gathered slowly fell silent, captivated by the performance. One boy who had once mocked her for her clothes stood with wide eyes, unable to look away. Another child leaned forward, mesmerized by the way her fingers danced across the keys. The music was no longer just a sound. It was a story, a bridge connecting hearts and emotions. It carried the weight of her experiences, the struggles she faced each day, and the dreams she held deep inside. The piano became a voice that could not be ignored, a voice that commanded attention and respect. As the piece reached its climax, she felt a surge of energy and determination. She pressed harder, letting the notes soar, filling every corner of the room. Her heart raced with the power of the music, the rhythm of her fingers, and the emotion behind each chord. She imagined herself on a stage with a hall full of people listening, understanding and feeling the story she was telling. The thought energized her, and she poured everything she had into the performance, leaving nothing behind. Each note was a reflection of her courage, her resilience, and her unwavering passion for music. When the last note faded, the room was silent for a moment, as if everyone were holding their breath. Then slowly applause began. It started as a quiet clapping, then grew louder, echoing through the room. The children who had gathered looked at her with newfound respect, their previous teasing forgotten. The volunteers smiled, impressed by the growth and skill she had shown. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. For the first time, she realized that her music had the power to move people, to change the way they saw her, and to make them understand the depth of her talent. One volunteer approached her gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "That was extraordinary," the woman said softly. "You have something very special. Keep practicing and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Tears welled up in her eyes. She had longed for recognition, for someone to see the effort, emotion, and talent she had poured into her music. The words were like sunlight, warming her from the inside and filling her with hope. She nodded, silently promising herself that she would continue no matter the obstacles. The days that followed were filled with determination and growth. She practiced tirelessly, exploring new melodies, experimenting with emotions, and learning to express herself more fully through music. Each afternoon at the community center became an opportunity to push her abilities further, to discover new sounds, and to refine her techniques. The piano had become a trusted companion, a teacher, and a friend. It responded to her touch, her intention, and her emotion, guiding her through each step of her musical journey. The teasing from other children gradually faded, replaced by curiosity and admiration. They began to watch quietly rather than mock, some even asking questions about her playing. She answered politely but briefly, aware that her music spoke louder than words. She had learned that talent and perseverance could overcome judgment and ridicule. The music was untouchable, a part of her that belonged only to her and the piano. It gave her a sense of control and power that was rare in her life, a space where she could shine without fear. At home, she shared her experiences quietly with her family, describing the pieces she had played, the reactions she had received, and the small victories that filled her heart with pride. Her family listened with smiles, proud not only of her skill but of her courage, determination, and resilience. Even though their lives were still marked by scarcity and struggle, the music brought light and hope into their home. It reminded them that talent, passion, and perseverance could create joy and achievement, even in difficult circumstances. She began to imagine a future beyond the community center. She dreamed of performing in larger spaces, sharing her music with audiences who would understand and appreciate the emotions behind each note. She thought about how music could connect people, inspire courage, and create understanding. These dreams filled her with a sense of purpose, motivating her to practice diligently and to continue developing her skills. She knew that every note she played, every melody she created, brought her closer to a future where her music could touch the lives of others. The girl also discovered the importance of self-discipline and patience. Learning to play the piano well required time, focus, and perseverance. She embraced each challenge, learning from mistakes and celebrating successes no matter how small. The piano taught her that progress often came slowly, but that dedication and persistence could yield extraordinary results. Each practice session became a step forward, a building block in her journey toward mastery and self-expression. Her confidence grew with each passing day. She walked to school and the community center with a sense of purpose, aware of the strength and talent within her. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and felt a deeper connection to the world around her. Music had opened a door to self-discovery, allowing her to explore her emotions, understand herself more deeply, and express her experiences in a way that words could not. She had learned that her voice through the piano could communicate more powerfully than any argument or explanation. The girl also noticed how much she inspired others without even trying. Children who had once teased her now looked at her with curiosity and admiration. Volunteers and teachers at the community center began to recognize her dedication and growth. Her family, too, saw the transformation, proud not only of her talent but of the determination and courage she displayed. Music had become a force that changed not only her life, but also the lives of those around her, creating a ripple effect of respect, inspiration, and hope, even in moments of doubt or discouragement. When hunger or fatigue threatened to overwhelm her, she found solace in the piano. It reminded her of her strength, her dreams, and the beauty she could create. Each note was a testament to her courage, resilience, and determination. She knew that the journey would not always be easy, that challenges and setbacks would arise, but she also knew that her talent, combined with dedication and passion, could carry her through. The girl continued to push herself, exploring new pieces, experimenting with different styles, and expressing a wider range of emotions through her music. She discovered the joy of creating melodies that told stories, conveyed feelings, and connected with listeners on a deep emotional level. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a partner in her journey, a guide and a friend. It allowed her to navigate the challenges of her life, transform hardship into beauty, and communicate her innermost thoughts and feelings. As the days turned into weeks, she realized that the piano had given her more than musical skill. It had given her confidence, purpose, and a sense of identity. She had discovered a way to rise above the limitations imposed by hunger, poverty, and judgment. Music had become her voice, her refuge, and her path forward. And as she practiced each day, she felt a growing certainty that her talent could lead her to a future where she could share her gift, touch the lives of others, and prove that determination, resilience, and passion could overcome even the greatest obstacles. The morning sun shone softly through the small cracks of her window, casting long beams of light across the modest room. She woke with a quiet sense of anticipation, a feeling that today was different from any other day. Her stomach was still empty, but the excitement in her chest made the ache easier to bear. She quickly dressed, pulling on her worn shoes, and stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against her face. The streets were familiar, lined with the homes of neighbors who had watched her grow, and she walked with a purpose she had never felt before. The community center was calling her as it always did, but today, there was a sense of destiny that she could not ignore. At school, Her mind wandered to the piano, to the melodies she had been practicing and refining for weeks. Her teachers spoke and wrote on the blackboard, but her thoughts floated in a world of notes and rhythms. She imagined her hands moving across the keys, creating music that could touch hearts and tell stories without words. Her classmates chatted, played, and laughed, but she remained focused, her imagination alive with the sounds she had been dreaming of. When the final bell rang, releasing the children into the streets, she hurried toward the community center, her small feet pattering against the worn stones of the path. She felt the usual flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. The piano sat in its corner, patient and silent, waiting for her arrival. She approached it and took a deep breath, placing her hands carefully on the keys. Today she intended to play her most complete piece yet. One that told the story of her journey, the struggles, the hunger, the perseverance, and the dreams that had guided her. As her fingers touched the keys, the first notes filled the room. The sound was clear, soft at first, then swelling with confidence as she allowed the music to take control. Each note she played carried emotion, telling a story that was both personal and universal. She thought of the mornings when she had gone without breakfast, the teasing from children at school, and the long walks with worn shoes and tired legs. All of those experiences transformed into melodies, rising and falling with her emotions. The piano became her voice, speaking the words she could not say, expressing what her heart had always felt. A small crowd of children and volunteers gathered, drawn by the sound. Some had teased her in the past, but they now watched quietly, their expressions a mixture of awe and curiosity. They leaned closer, unable to look away as the music carried the weight of her journey. She played with intensity and grace, each note deliberate, each chord infused with feeling. The room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the power of the performance. Even the volunteers paused their tasks, drawn in by the story unfolding through her fingers. The melody rose and fell, gentle in some moments, bold and sweeping in others. She explored the full range of emotion, from sadness to hope, from despair to triumph. The piano spoke for her, telling the story of a child who had faced hardship but refused to be defeated. The music transcended words, touching the hearts of everyone who listened. Some children whispered apologies for past teasing, their voices small but sincere. Others simply stared, moved by the honesty and depth of the performance. Her hands moved with confidence she had never known before, guided by intuition and passion. Each note was precise, each chord intentional, creating a narrative that was both beautiful and profound. She felt a surge of energy and pride as the music unfolded, realizing that her dedication and perseverance had brought her to this moment. The piano had become an extension of herself, a partner in expressing the feelings she could not contain. The room seemed to vibrate with the life of her music, and she felt a deep connection to everyone who listened. When the final note echoed and faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then slowly applause began, growing louder and louder, filling the room with warmth and appreciation. The children who had once mocked her looked at her with respect, some clapping softly, others whispering words of admiration. The volunteers smiled, moved by the skill, emotion, and courage they had witnessed. She felt a wave of relief and joy, knowing that her music had reached hearts and minds, that it had told her story without words, and that it had inspired understanding and recognition. One of the volunteers approached her, eyes bright with pride. "You have a gift that can touch the world," the woman said gently. "Never stop playing. Keep sharing your music, and it will carry you far." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, overwhelmed by the affirmation and the sense of possibility. She had longed for someone to see her, to recognize her talent and passion, and now that wish had come true. The words and applause filled her with courage, reinforcing the belief that her music had the power to change lives, including her own. Over the following weeks, her confidence continued to grow. She practiced tirelessly, refining her melodies, exploring new rhythms, and experimenting with expression. Each afternoon at the community center became an opportunity for discovery, a chance to stretch her abilities and deepen her connection to the music. She began to imagine performances beyond the center, sharing her gift with audiences who would appreciate and understand the emotions behind each note. Her dreams expanded, fueled by determination and the recognition she had received. The teasing from children faded almost completely, replaced by curiosity and admiration. Some came to learn from her, asking questions and observing how her fingers moved across the keys. She answered patiently, realizing that she could inspire and teach others through her example. Her family, too, noticed the changes. They saw her growing in confidence, in courage, and in skill, proud of the dedication and resilience she displayed. Music had become a source of empowerment, not only for herself but for those around her, creating a ripple of inspiration and hope. Evenings at home were spent reflecting on the progress she had made. She imagined herself performing on larger stages, sharing her music with audiences who would understand and appreciate the depth of her emotion. She thought about how music could connect hearts, inspire courage, and create understanding between people from different walks of life. These thoughts motivated her to continue practicing diligently, to explore new pieces, and to push the boundaries of her talent. She understood that each note, each melody, and each practice session brought her closer to her dreams. The girl also learned the value of patience and persistence. Progress in music, she realized, came gradually, and mistakes were part of the journey. She embraced challenges, learning from each misstep, and celebrated successes no matter how small. The piano had become a guide, a teacher, and a companion, showing her the rewards of dedication and the beauty of self-expression. Each day brought new discoveries, new melodies, and new confidence, reinforcing her belief in herself and her abilities. Her confidence in life, not just in music, grew steadily. She walked to school in the community center with a sense of purpose and assurance. She smiled more easily, spoke more confidently, and felt a deeper connection to the world around her. Music had opened doors to self-discovery, resilience, and creativity. She had learned that talent, determination, and perseverance could overcome the limitations imposed by circumstances, and that her voice, through music, could communicate more powerfully than words alone. The girl's influence extended beyond herself. Children who had once mocked her now looked up to her with respect and admiration. Volunteers and teachers recognized her dedication and growth. Her family felt proud of her courage, determination, and achievement. Music had become a transformative force, not only shaping her identity but inspiring those around her. It had shown that even in the face of hardship, beauty, talent, and resilience could flourish. As she practiced and performed, she found solace in the piano during moments of doubt or difficulty. It reminded her of her strength, dreams, and the beauty she could create. Each note she played was a testament to courage, resilience, and passion. She knew the journey ahead would include challenges, but she also knew that her talent, dedication, and love for music would guide her through. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a path forward, a refuge, and a partner in expressing her soul. Over time, she imagined herself performing for larger audiences, sharing her music far beyond the community center. She dreamed of the day when people would listen, understand, and feel the emotions she poured into each piece. Her melodies told stories of struggle, perseverance, hope, and triumph. She wanted her music to inspire, to comfort, and to bring joy, proving that passion and dedication could transform even the most difficult circumstances into something extraordinary. One afternoon, she played a piece she had composed herself, pouring every feeling she had into the keys. Her fingers moved with precision and emotion, creating a melody that rose and fell like waves. The children who had gathered watched in awe, some moved to tears, others whispering quietly to one another. Volunteers applauded, and a warm sense of pride filled the room. In that moment, she realized how far she had come, from a hungry girl uncertain of her abilities to a confident musician capable of touching hearts with her music. The piano had given her more than skill. It had given her confidence, purpose, and identity. She had learned that dedication, perseverance, and passion could overcome obstacles, and that her voice through music was powerful and undeniable.